From Community Public Radio, this is the CPR News. From New York, I'm Don DeBar.
Today we're going to take a look at the U.S. pullout of Afghanistan as a geopolitical issue for the U.S. and Russia's response to COVID with Mark Sloboda, lecturer in international relations at Moscow State University in Moscow, Russian Federation.
Mark, it's been too long. I'm glad to have you on, and I guess we could maybe start with Afghanistan.
Don, thanks for having me on. It's always an honor and a pleasure.
Ours too.
Afghanistan is, it's going to be one of those moments that has the ability to shake geopolitics. Not, of course, I think just for, the strategic space and importance on the geopolitical map of Afghanistan, but simply for the fact that the world lone for the moment superpower, the hyperpower, after 20 years failed its nation building exercise in Afghanistan, failed completely. And the amazing thing is the Taliban now has greater control of Afghanistan than it did before the U.S. invasion in 2001. that shocks a lot of people because the Taliban never actually controlled all of Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance,
right,
in the Panjshir Valley in the north. And just now, the Washington Post is reporting that the Panjshir Valley has fallen to the Taliban.
Yep.
And that was like the last heartland. Before 2001, the Northern Alliance had more than just that. But Massoud's son is not Massoud. He's a Sandhurst,
right,
educated foreigner, as far not a fighter, as far as the Afghan Tajiks are concerned, and right. the Panjshir Valley is majority Tajik, and the CIA's creature, Saleh, they failed. Amrullah Saleh, they failed to get anything going there. The border was already cut off, and Tajikistan may be concerned about the Taliban taking over all of Afghanistan and being right on their border, but they weren't about to do anything major in terms of support for the Northern Alliance 2.0, which is now effectively kaput, against Taliban 2.0.
So, all right, so the U.S. nation-building experiment in Afghanistan fails. The U.S. nation-building and democracy project in Iraq, of course, has been in tatters for maybe a decade at least now and laid bare. The humanitarian assistance and democratization project in Libya left nothing but debris. What exactly do these people have to sell out in the open market now as the competition between Eurasia and in North America and the EU is, sort of moving on to another stage?
Yeah, that's real interesting. That if we look back over the last 2 decades of the quote war on terror, and the war on terror, I think it started out going after Al-Qaeda, supposedly, of course, in Afghanistan. Then they looked for them in Iraq, knowing they weren't there, and there weren't any weapons of mass destruction either. And, supposedly they found him in what was at the time U.S. ally Pakistan. But, who knows what really happened there? I certainly don't. But the cost of the total war on terror now, the last 2 decades, cost the U.S. taxpayers, according to the estimates that are coming out now, some more than $8 trillion
Jesus.
which is that's huge. More than $8 trillion. And the total cost of lives is, we have to talk, of course, not just about U.S. lives,
Yeah, really.
but about the other lives that have been lost in all of these countries. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah, I mean, the war was fought in Afghanistan, for example, so it's not American lives that are going to be at the top of the list of casualties.
Yeah, so officially, the U.S. lost some 2,500 troops over the course of the 20 years, which isn't a lot.
Right.
And that, of course, the last year plus of that, there weren't any U.S. casualties, at least up until the last few days when 13 died, not even from the Taliban, but supposedly from this ISIS Khorasan, which there's a lot of questions about U.S. involvement with them. But right. we'll leave that as it is.
Right.
And the reason there weren't any is because Donald Trump entered into a deal with the Taliban. We're going to get out of Dodge, and you don't attack us. And we'll try to make a deal with the Afghan government, but that never worked out because Ghani's government refused to talk or deal with the Taliban and was very upset with the U.S. for leaving.
Right.
And the U.S. government just carried on, and they're like, all right, we're getting out of here because it's not doing anything for us. It's a waste on our resources, and we've got Plan B and C to make sure that it remains a problem for the rest of the surrounding Eurasian powers, and we're more focused on the next thing, and that's what the U.S. is doing. It is reallocating military resources for its coming war against China.
Right.
In the Western Pacific, in the South China Sea, and or the Taiwan Straits. Right. And this is something that the U.S. military brass and the geopolitical big brains, right, in D.C. they talk about this as an inevitability. Right. They don't talk about something that, it could happen. No, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen sometime in the next 5 to 15 years. That's the window, because past that 15 years, China will have a blue water navy capable of taking on the U.S. beyond those dotted island chain lines, right? The containment will no longer. They have to do that. They have to strike against the Chinese Navy now, and they talk about it, and they're quite open. Right. They are in a Thucydides trap. They view the Thucydides trap, right? Yes. The ancient Greek political philosopher is real simple. I mean, you can go more complicated, but at the most basic level is if you have a falling hegemon and a potential rising hegemon that have crossing interests, then conflict is inevitable, and they believe this in Washington. They if you remember during the 90s, right, when China's economy was growing and U.S. companies were investing there, moving their supply chain.
Hello?
Everything, and the U.S. was talking win-win, right? Everybody wins. Globalization, everybody wins, right? Until, we're looking 2 decades past that, 3 decades, total from the 90s, and economic power in the world has shifted so much, and the U.S. just can't compete anymore. And it's not just about production anymore, because China is doing R&D, right? High tech. 5G is the perfect example of that, right? We have to stop Huawei, right? We have to block them out of our countries, and we have to force European countries and our allies in the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand. You can't take Huawei
Right.
because because the Chinese could spy on your telecommunications.
Right.
Actually, that's not the biggest concern. Their concern, we're talking the global Five Eyes spying cabal between the
Right.
five Anglo countries. They are already spying on all communications, right?
All of them.
Through fiber optic, telephone, internet, anything, email, right?
conversation.
Anything they want to,
That's right.
right? They're not, of course, looking at everything all the time or tapping everything all the time, but they have the potential to if they feel the need. And of course, they're data mining the living heck out of it.
Right.
But if Huawei is now doing the communication, the telecommunications, the Chinese,
Right.
then they won't be able to tap it as easily.
That's right.
And that's
right.
what they're really concerned about
right.
is they're losing the oversight, the
That's right.
control
Their own
over the
power,
information flows. Never mind whether China actually gets it or not either. They're concerned about losing what they have. And so then the option is okay, all right, we can't have Huawei. What do we? Oh, there is no Western company that can do that right now.
right.
Because there isn't, right? No one has the telecommunications, the capability to do a 5G network on the scale that a Chinese corporation can do right now.
Right.
And China's economy, by some measures, is already greater than the United States. Of course, something like 1/10 of the U.S.'s total what are we looking at? $25 trillion right now, something close
like that,
to that. Is owed to China, and amazingly enough, the U.S. keeps taking out loans, effectively, through quantitative easing, printing more money, and China, keeps investing in that dollar as a reserve currency,
Right.
and the U.S. is taking out loans to build a military to attack China.
Right.
From China. I mean,
Look,
that's the insanity of it.
Okay, so here's a town. I live in it and you live in it. You're a rich guy. I'm poor. I borrow money from you all the time. But I have guns and you have none. So when I default, what are you going to do?
So win-win is done, right?
Yep,
now
that's
it's the U.S. can't economically compete. They're facing, being out R&D'd or out teched on questions that will dominate, the military conflicts of the medium future, like AI. Right. And Putin is actually talking about that all the time now.
Yeah.
But Russia is ahead of the U.S. in hypersonic weapons.
Right.
Why? Because the U.S. can't do hypersonic weapons? No. But Russia warned when the U.S. pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2001, 2003, the early 2000s, that you pull out of this and our strategic deterrent starts coming under a threat.
Right.
And you have a much, much larger, more powerful, better funded conventional military than we do. So we need our nuclear deterrent to keep you at bay, because we see you in Iraq and Libya and Syria and Afghanistan and everywhere, right? We need that strategic deterrent. So we can't respond symmetrically. So we're going to respond asymmetrically.
Right.
And what did they build? They built missiles that can evade any U.S. Ballistic missile defense that can be imagined in the current time. And why? Because it's always cheaper to build missiles to avoid missile defense than it is to build missile defense.
Right.
That is a simple economics.
Right.
The curve of development, and that Russia is now ahead of the U.S. Not that far, but the U.S., Russia,
Right.
China, EU, India, all developing hypersonic weapons,
Right.
and that's a threat to everyone, right? Because those things
Sure.
reduce the response time
Right. Exactly.
to
Yep.
right. The decision making time. Do we launch Armageddon in reply, or is this a faulty reading?
Right.
Right. You have less of a time to make that decision because the response time, because these weapons are so much faster and evade anything that can be thrown at them, that you have a shorter period of time to make that fatal decision whether to end the world or not.
Right.
And so that's a threat. But Russia was quite honest at the time. We have to respond to that for our national security, and they did. And now we are in the midst of a new arms race, a qualitative arms race on new tech. Right, on hypersonic weapons, hypersonic missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, AI and SAI, autonomous kill vehicles, right? Underwater drones, nuclear power drones. We're way in the world of really new dangerous tech, and that's not even getting to the bio stuff that
Right.
is a looming specter that there is less confirmation about. But we see how well
Right.
our
Not prepared.
countries respond to a not even terribly serious pandemic. How well we're all doing. I mean,
This is what we do
Russia's
with the
not doing
flu.
any better
Okay.
than the United States.
Nobody
so.
is. Actually, the best are places that are lucky by their sort of social design, where it's rural and people are separated, not concentrated. And so this thing, so far, it's not highly contagious, although it's contagious. So, if it's one thing if you're riding in a subway car or, tram or whatever with 50 other people, yeah, it's contagious in that environment. But, if you're in an ox cart and there's another ox cart a mile down the road, chances are you're not going to catch it.
Well,
Some things you can catch
alternative
that
with
way.
China is you have a disciplined society
Right.
that takes orders and wears their masks and gets their vaccinations. Not that they really have any choice in the matter, but you see the effectiveness now. And in Russia, I'm told all the time that I live in by the Western media that I live in authoritarian country. Well, I disagree with that, right? Because I live here. I've lived here for 2 decades now. I wish we were more authoritarian than that, because our death rate on a per capita basis is from the COVID. If you're taking a look at excess deaths, which is a much more reliable figure in all countries involved, is on a per capita basis higher than the U.S.
Wow.
And on a regular basis is second only to the U.S. And it's because of anti-vaxxer sentiment in Russia, of mistrust of vaccines. And that's actually, it's crazy here, because actually the political party in Russia that is pushing this insinuation, they'd never come right out on it, is the communists, the
Wow.
KPRF. If you take a look at the political party affiliation, the vaccines and anti-vaxxer sentiment, United Russia, the party that supports Putin, the majority party in Russia, they have the highest rate of vaccination. At 55% as of a couple weeks ago, and the lowest amount of people who say, I haven't been vaccinated and I will not get vaccinated.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the communists have the lowest percentage of vaccinated and the highest percentage of people saying, I'm not vaccinated and I have no intention of getting vaccinated for whatever crazy anti-science reason you have. And that is amazing, because since when were the communists in the Soviet Union ever anti-vaccine?
Right. No, it's all like
Right?
pretty
I mean, everything
interesting.
was vaccinated. They defeated smallpox and everything else, just like the West did through programs of vaccination.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
we don't even have the Bill Gates excuse. Oh, Bill Gates is inflicting nano micro mind control chips, whatever tinfoil hat thing that you're reading out of this. Because Russia has its own several indigenous vaccines,
Right.
all of which, by all accounts, are extremely effective. I myself, my wife, we both, got Sputnik. We've had our booster, and we're sitting well, but in total, Russia's response to the coronavirus is no better than the United States, and it's only, these small island nations like New Zealand or Singapore that do have a high level of public trust, or the complete real authoritarian country like China that just says you will all wear your masks and you will all get your vaccines. And I'm sure you've seen the videos of little Chinese grandmothers, going out for their daily walk and drones flying up to them and saying, "Grandmother, you should be home."
Nice.
I don't know if you've seen that. I mean,
No.
but it's a real thing, right?
No,
I mean,
wow.
that is China. It's crazy that way. But
Wow.
whatever you may think of their society, right? And
That's their
you can
society.
say authoritarian, you can say totalitarian, whatever you want, but they're handling the crisis much better, and they have the first truly confirmed outbreak
Right.
of COVID-19, and they have the ridiculously low death rate as a result.
Let me ask something. This is something because we had some discussion with Steve Sefton about this yesterday, as a matter of fact, in Nicaragua, which is a place like I described before, and they were, had an entirely different approach to this, just vaccinating frontline workers and people in the cities, and they've had a very low rate and a very low death rate, but. Again, this is more a consequence of the social construction there. People aren't generally that physically, proximate or intimate on a regular basis like the people are in more urban, settings. And so, and also they have a very good public health care system. And so does Russia, relatively speaking, and particularly with respect to the United States in terms of the extent within the population that healthcare is accessible. Maybe you could describe that a little bit, like compare kind of the general public health situation between the U.S. and Russia as context for this.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the United States that, up to 40% of the population doesn't have health care or doesn't have regular, affordable health care. In Russia, there is a public health system, and it is, say, not. Has degraded somewhat, I would say, in quality since the Soviet Union. It's still hanging on impetus from the Soviet Union. And more money has been invested in it in recent years, kind of pushing it back up a little bit. But it forms more, I would say, in Russia of a safety net, right?
Right.
There exists private healthcare. And a lot of people, with good corporate jobs have that. But if you don't have that, then, there is the public health care, and it is free, right? There really is no cost involved. Sometimes, out in the regions, in the worst off areas, the doctors may ask the families to help, get some better medicines than they have immediately available with the costs and so on. But by and large, it's essentially free. It's of good quality. It's not, say, quite as good as Germany or Scandinavia. That I would say that it's a little bit lower level than that, but it's better. It's about equal to with France, and a little bit better than you would say in Greece or Italy. If we're taking a look on a European comparison, which is, whatever you're looking at is better than the 40% of Americans that can't get healthcare at all. And I got the Moscow government, for instance, and Moscow is the richest part of Russia by far, right? New York and Washington thrown together, so there's more resources here. But there's also 10% of the Russian population in Moscow.
Right, it's huge. Yeah,
it's huge, right? There's
14 million or something,
people,
15 million.
14 million people here, right? They put up on top of all the hospitals, right? And they built new coronavirus hospitals like many countries did, and they reestablished wards in older hospitals. But they also put up a bunch of pop-up building clinics all around the city. And when I went and got my vaccine, it was all extremely modern, extremely professional. We were in and out of there in less than 30 minutes.
Wow.
with the vaccine, and you came back for the second dose, and we're out of there even quicker, and at no cost, at all. So that Russia does have a universal healthcare system, and there are definitely some smaller European countries with smaller territory and smaller populations where it is better, but it is also better than some, right. And it's certainly better than not having any.
Yeah, exactly. I hear that. Because the relevance obviously is this particularly corona particularly damaging to people who are vulnerable, quote unquote, medically. And obviously, if 40% of your population doesn't have a doctor really because they can't afford one, you're going to see a concentration of various maladies in that population that's going to basically have them classified as vulnerable. And so the impact would be worse than it would be absent that lack of health care.
Yeah. And again, ultimately, Russia is paying just as high a price but that is not due to a collapse of the medical system. The medical system actually has been pretty resilient. It's because of anti-vaxxer sentiment and the general unwillingness to obey mask restrictions, lockdowns, and if you take a look, for instance, just at last year, originally Russia's deaths, both the official ones and the excess deaths, were pretty low. But last September, when Europe went back into lockdown, Russia, mainly because of economic prioritization, economy is more important than, ultimately, which is majority older people's pensioners' lives. And I strongly disagreed with that decision by the Kremlin, but they paid a price for it, and the deaths, both the official and even higher, the excess deaths, went through the roof over the Christmas and New Year's season, and now Russia's, because of that refusal to go back into lockdown, to keep the economy running and very few restrictions and even fewer people who obey those restrictions, Russia's, not doing well right now. I wouldn't say they're necessarily worse than the U.S. because I understand things aren't going very well over there with, the upsurge in cases with Delta and everything. But it's not going well over here either. And again, I think that I've seen these stories. Oh, anti-vaxxer sentiment is because of Russia bots and everything like that, and I'm like, no, actually, Russia got most of its anti-vaxxer sentiment from the U.S. Right? Thanks a lot, guys. Maybe there's some synergy, but by and large, I think there's more people in Russia paying attention to this type of disinfo coming self-generated, not even intentional, but out of the United States than vice versa.
We're almost out of time, so we'll have to pick up next week where this was. But one of the things that's curious also to me is, of course, the U.S. is supposedly the home of the free press and all of that, and Russia in its various incarnations, antipathy towards such a free press. But these things are freely discussed in the media there, vaxxer and anti-vaxxer stuff, and here you lose your Facebook account for saying something quote unquote anti-vaxxer these days. It's an interesting. This is another example of what nonsense the official narrative's been for the decades preceding us. Mark, we'll catch up with you next week, and I really appreciate your time. And maybe we'll get to Afghanistan next week too.
Yeah, we'll get back to that because we just touched on it.
Great. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Yep.
And that's all the news we have for you right now. For Community Public Radio, I'm Don DeBar in New York. Thanks for listening.